Olaf was the name of a warrior king who was called Olaf the White. He was the son of King Ingjald, Helgi's son, the son of Olaf, Gudraud's son of Halfdan Whiteleg, king of the Uplands men. Olaf engaged in a western freebooting expedition and captured Dublin in Ireland and the Shire of Dublin, over which he became king. He married Aud the Wealthy, daughter of Ketil Flatnose, son of Bjorn Buna, a famous man of Norway. Their son was called Torstein the Red. Olaf was killed in battle in Ireland, and Aud and Torstein went then to the Hebrides. There Torstein married Turid, daughter of Eyvind Easterling, sister of Helgi the Lean. They had many children. Torstein became a warrior king and entered into fellowship with Earl Sigurd the Mighty, son of Eystein the Rattler. They conquered Caithness and Sutherland, Ross and Moray, and more than the half of Scotland. Over these Torstein became king ere he was betrayed by the Scots and was slain there in battle. Aud was at Caithness when she heard of Torstein's death. She thereupon caused a ship to be secretly built in the forest, and when she was ready, she sailed out to the Orkneys. There she bestowed Groa, Torstein the Red's daughter, in marriage. She was the mother of Greylad, whom Earl Thorfinn Skullcleaver married. After this Aud set out to seek Iceland, and had on board her ship 20 freemen. Aud arrived in Iceland, and passed the first winter at Bjarnarhofen with her brother Bjorn, and afterwards took possession of all the Dale country between Dogurdar River and Skraumulaups River. She lived at Hvam, and held her orisons at Krosshallar, where she caused crosses to be erected, for she had been baptized and was a devout believer. With her there came out to Iceland many distinguished men, who had been captured in the western freebooting expedition and were called slaves. Vifil was the name of one of these. He was a high-born man, who had been taken captive in the Western Sea, and was called a slave before Aud freed him. Now when Aud gave homesteads to the members of her crew, Vifil asked wherefore she gave him no homestead as to the other men. Aud replied that this should make no difference to him, saying that he would be regarded as a distinguished man wherever he was. She gave him Vifilsdal, and there he dwelt. He married a woman whose name was Blank. Their sons were Torbjorn and Torgeir. They were men of promise and grew up with their father. Eric the Red finds Greenland. There was a man named Torvald. He was the son of Asvald, Ulf's son, Eyxnatori's son. His son's name was Eric. He and his father went from Jaederen to Iceland on account of manslaughter, and settled on Hornstrandir and dwelt at Drangar. There Torvald died, and Eric then married Thorhild, a daughter of Jorund, Atli's son, and Torbjorg the ship-chested, who had been married before to Torbjorn of the Haukadal family. Eric then removed from the north, and cleared land in Haukadal, and dwelt at Ericstadir by Vatnshorn. Then Eric's thralls caused a landslide on Valthiof's farm, Valthiofstadir. Eyjolf the Foul, Volthiof's kinsman, slew the thralls near Skadesbrekkr above Vatnshorn. For this Eric killed Eyjolf the Foul, and he also killed Dueling Hrafn at Leikskalar. Gerstein and Odd of Jorva, Eyjolf's kinsmen, conducted the prosecution for the slaying of their kinsmen, and Eric was in consequence banished from Haukadal. He then took possession of Broki and Exney, and dwelt at Tradir on Sudri the first winter. It was at this time that he loaned Thorgest his outer dais boards. Eric afterwards went to Exney, and dwelt at Ericstad. He then demanded his outer dais boards, but did not obtain them. Eric then carried the outer dais boards away from Breidabólstad, and Thorgest gave chase. They came to blows a short distance from the farm of Drangar. There 2 of Thorgest's sons were killed, and certain other men besides. After this, each of them retained a considerable body of men with him at his home. Styr gave Eric his support, as did also Eyjolf of Svini, Torbjorn, Vifil's son, and the sons of Torbrand of Alptafirth, while Thorgest was backed by the sons of Tord the Yeller, and Thorgeir of Hitardal, Aslak of Langadal, and his son Illugi. Eric and his people were condemned to outlawry at Torsnesthing. He equipped his ship for a voyage in Eriksvag, while Eyjolf concealed him in Dimunarvag when Thorgest and his people were searching for him among the islands. He said to them that it was his intention to go in search of that land which Gunnbjorn, son of Ulf the Crow, saw when he was driven out of his course, westward across the main, and discovered Gunnbjorn's skerries. He told them that he would return again to his friends if he should succeed in finding that country. Torbjorn and Eyjolf and Styr accompanied Eric out beyond the islands, and they parted with the greatest friendliness. Eric said to them that he would render them similar aid, so far as it might lie within his power, if they should ever stand in need of his help. Eric sailed out to sea from Snæfell's Jökull and arrived at that ice mountain which is called Blacksark. Thence he sailed to the southward, that he might ascertain whether there was habitable country in that direction. He passed the first winter at Eriksey, near the middle of the western settlement. In the following spring he proceeded to Eriksfirth and selected a site there for his homestead. That summer he explored the western uninhabited region, remaining there for a long time and assigning many local names there. The second winter he spent at Eriksholms beyond Varsnipa, but the third summer he sailed northward to Snæfell and into Hransfirth. He believed then that he had reached the head of Eriksfirth. He turned back then, and remained the third winter at Eriksey at the mouth of Eriksfirth. The following summer he sailed to Iceland and landed in Breidafirth. He remained that winter with Ingolf at Holmlatr. In the spring he and Thorgest fought together, and Eric was defeated. After this a reconciliation was effected between them. That summer Eric set out to colonize the land which he had discovered, and which he called Greenland, because, he said, men would be the more readily persuaded thither if the land had a good name. Concerning Torbjorn. Thorgeir, Vifil's son, married, and took to wife Arnora, daughter of Einar of Laugarbrekka, Sigmund's son of Ketil Thistil, who settled Thistilsfirth. Einar had another daughter named Halveig. She was married to Torbjorn, Vifil's son, who got with her Laugarbrekka land on Hellisvellir. Torbjorn moved thither and became a very distinguished man. He was an excellent husbandman, and had a great estate. Gudrid was the name of Torbjorn's daughter. She was the most beautiful of her sex, and in every respect a very superior woman. There dwelt at Arnarstapi a man named Orm, whose wife's name was Haldis. Orm was a good husbandman and a great friend of Torbjorn, and Gudrid lived with him for a long time as a foster daughter. There was a man named Thorgeir who lived at Thorgeirsfell. He was very wealthy and had been manumitted. He had a son named Einar, who was a handsome, well-bred man, and very showy in his dress. Einar was engaged in trading voyages from one country to the other, and had prospered in this. He always spent his winter alternating either in Iceland or in Norway. Now it is to be told that one autumn, when Einar was in Iceland, he went with his wares out along Snæfellsnes with the intention of selling them. He came to Arnarstapi, and Orm invited him to remain with him, and Einar accepted this invitation, for there was a strong friendship between Orm and himself. Einar's wares were carried into a storehouse, where he unpacked them, and displayed them to Orm and the men of his household, and asked Orm to take such of them as he liked. Orm accepted this offer, and said that Einar was a good merchant, and was greatly favored by fortune. Now while they were busied about the wares, a woman passed before the door of the storehouse. Einar inquired of Orm, "Who was that handsome woman who passed before the door? I have never seen her here before." Orm replied, "That is Gudrid, my foster child, the daughter of Torbjorn of Lagarbrekka." "She must be a good match," said Einar. "Has she had any suitors?" Orm replied, "In good sooth she has been courted, friend, nor is she easily to be won, for it is believed that both she and her father will be very particular in their choice of a husband." "Be that as it may," quoth Einar, "she is the woman to whom I mean to pay my addresses, and I would have thee present this matter to her father in my behalf, and use every exertion to bring it to a favorable issue, and I shall reward thee to the full of my friendship if I am successful. It may be that Torbjorn will regard the connection as being to our mutual advantage, for while he is a most honorable man, and has a goodly home, his personal effects, I am told, are somewhat on the wane. But neither I nor my father are lacking in lands or chattels, and Torbjorn would be greatly aided thereby if this match should be brought about." "Surely I believe myself to be thy friend," replies Orm, "and yet I am by no means disposed to act in this matter, for Torbjorn hath a very haughty spirit, and is, moreover, a most ambitious man." Einar replied that he wished for naught else than that his suit should be broached. Orm replied that he should have his will. Einar fared again to the south until he reached his home. Some time after this Torbjorn had an autumn feast, as was his custom, for he was a man of high position. Hither came Orm of Arnarstapi and many other of Torbjorn's friends. Orm came to speech with Torbjorn, and said that Einar of Torgersfell had visited him not long before, and that he was become a very promising man. Orm now makes known the proposal of marriage in Einar's behalf, and added that for some persons and for some reasons it might be regarded as a very appropriate match. "Thou mayest greatly strengthen thyself thereby, master, by reason of the property." Torbjorn answers, "Little did I expect to hear such words from thee, that I should marry my daughter to the son of a thrall, and that, because it seems to thee that my means are diminishing, wherefore she shall not remain longer with thee, since thou deemest so mean a match as this suitable for her." Orm afterward returned to his home, and all of the invited guests to their respective households, while Gudrid remained behind with her father, and tarried at home that winter. But in the spring Torbjorn gave an entertainment to his friends, to which many came, and it was a noble feast, and at the banquet Torbjorn called for silence and spoke: "Here have I passed a goodly lifetime, and have experienced the good will of men towards me, and their affection, and, methinks, our relations together have been pleasant. But now I begin to find myself in straitened circumstances, although my estate has hitherto been accounted a respectable one. Now will I rather abandon my farming than lose my honor, and rather leave the country than bring disgrace upon my family. Wherefore I have now concluded to put that promise to the test which my friend Eric the Red made when we parted company in Breidafirth. It is my present design to go to Greenland this summer, if matters fare as I wish." The folk were greatly astonished at this plan of Torbjorn's, for he was blessed with many friends, but they were convinced that he was so firmly fixed in his purpose that it would not avail to endeavor to dissuade him from it. Torbjorn bestowed gifts upon his guests, after which the feast came to an end, and the folk returned to their homes. Torbjorn sells his lands and buys a ship, which was laid up at the mouth of Hraunhofen. 30 persons joined him in the voyage. Among these were Orm of Arnarstapi and his wife, and other of Torbjorn's friends, who would not part from him. Then they put to sea. When they sailed, the weather was favorable, but after they came out upon the high seas, the fair wind failed, and there came great gales, and they lost their way, and had a very tedious voyage that summer. Then illness appeared among their people, and Orm and his wife Halldis died, and the half of their company. The sea began to run high, and they had a very wearisome and wretched voyage in many ways, but arrived nevertheless at Heriolfsness in Greenland on the very eve of winter. At Heriolfsness lived a man named Thorkel. He was a man of ability and an excellent husbandman. He received Torbjorn and all his ship's company, and entertained them well during the winter. At that time there was a season of great dearth in Greenland. Those who had been at the fisheries had had poor hauls, and some had not returned. There was a certain woman there in the settlement whose name was Torbjorg. She was a prophetess, and was called Little Sibyl. She had had 9 sisters, all of whom were prophetesses, but she was the only one left alive. It was Torbjorg's custom in the winters to go to entertainments, and she was especially sought after at the homes of those who were curious to know their fate, or what manner of season might be in store for them. And inasmuch as Thorkel was the chief yeoman in the neighborhood, it was thought to devolve upon him to find out when the evil time which was upon them would cease. Thorkel invited the prophetess to his home, and careful preparations were made for her reception, according to the custom which prevailed when women of her kind were to be entertained. A high seat was prepared for her, in which a cushion filled with poultry feathers was placed. When she came in the evening with the man who had been sent to meet her, she was clad in a dark blue cloak, fastened with a strap, and set with stones quite down to the hem. She wore glass beads around her neck, and upon her head a black lambskin hood, lined with white catskin. In her hand she carried a staff, upon which there was a knob, which was ornamented with brass, and set with stones up about the knob. Circling her waist she wore a girdle of touchwood, and attached to it a great skin pouch, in which she kept the charms which she used when she was practicing her sorcery. She wore upon her feet shaggy calfskin shoes, with long tough latchets, upon the ends of which there were large brass buttons. She had catskin gloves upon her hands, which were white inside and lined with fur. When she entered, all of the folk felt it to be their duty to offer her becoming greetings. She received the salutations of each individual, according as he pleased her. Yeoman Thorkel took the Sibyl by the hand, and led her to the seat which had been made ready for her. Thorkel bade her run her eyes over man and beast and home. She had little to say concerning all these. The tables were brought forth in the evening, and it remains to be told what manner of food was prepared for the prophetess. A porridge of goats' beestings was made for her, and for meat there were dressed the hearts of every kind of beast which could be obtained there. She had a brass spoon, and a knife with a handle of walrus tusk, with a double hasp of brass around the haft, and from this the point was broken. And when the tables were removed, Yeoman Thorkel approached Torbjorg, and asked how she was pleased with the home and the character of the folk, and how speedily she would be likely to become aware of that concerning which he had questioned her, and which the people were anxious to know. She replied that she could not give an opinion in this matter before the morrow, after that she had slept there through the night. And on the morrow, when the day was far spent, such preparations were made as were necessary to enable her to accomplish her soothsaying. She bade them bring her those women who knew the incantation which she required to work her spells, and which she called warlocks, but such women were not to be found. Thereupon a search was made throughout the house to see whether any one knew this incantation. Then said Gudrid, "Although I am neither skilled in the black art nor a sibyl, yet my foster mother Halldis taught me in Iceland that spell song which she called warlocks." Torbjorg answered, "Then art thou wise in season?" Gudrid replied, "This is an incantation and ceremony of such a kind that I do not mean to lend it any aid, for that I am a Christian woman." Torbjorg answered, "It might so be that thou couldst give thy help to the company here, and still be no worse woman than before. However, I leave it with Thorkel to provide for my needs." Thorkel now so urged Gudrid that she said she must needs comply with his wishes. The women then made a ring round about, while Torbjorg sat up on the spell dais. Gudrid then sang the song, so sweet and well that no one remembered ever before to have heard the melody sung with so fair a voice as this. The sorceress thanked her for the song, and said, "She has indeed lured many spirits hither, who think it pleasant to hear this song, those who were wont to forsake us hitherto, and refuse to submit themselves to us. Many things are now revealed to me which hitherto have been hidden, both from me and from others, and I am able to announce that this period of famine will not endure longer, but the season will mend as spring approaches. The visitation of disease, which has been so long upon you, will disappear sooner than expected. And thee, Gudrid, I shall reward out of hand for the assistance which thou hast vouchsafed us, since the fate in store for thee is now all made manifest to me. Thou shalt make a most worthy match here in Greenland, but it shall not be of long duration for thee, for thy future path leads out to Iceland, and a lineage both great and goodly shall spring from thee, and above thy line brighter rays of light shall shine than I have power clearly to unfold. And now farewell and health to thee, my daughter." After this the folk advanced to the Sibyl, and each besought information concerning that about which he was most serious. She was very ready in her responses, and little of that which she foretold failed of fulfilment. After this they came for her from a neighboring farmstead, and she thereupon set out thither. Torbjorn was then sent for, since he had not been willing to remain at home while such heathen rites were practicing. The weather improved speedily when the spring opened, even as Torbjorg had prophesied. Torbjorn equipped his ship and sailed away until he arrived at Brattahlid. Eric received him with open arms, and said that it was well that he had come thither. Torbjorn and his household remained with him during the winter, while quarters were provided for the crew among the farmers. In the following spring Eric gave Torbjorn land on Stokkhanis, where a goodly farmstead was founded, and there he lived thenceforward. Eric was married to a woman named Thorhild, and had 2 sons. One of these was named Torstein, and the other Leif. They were both promising men. Torstein lived at home with his father, and there was not at that time a man in Greenland who was accounted of so great promise as he. Leif had sailed to Norway, where he was at the court of King Olaf Tryggvason. When Leif sailed from Greenland in the summer, they were driven out of their course to the Hebrides. It was late before they got fair winds thence, and they remained there far into the summer. Leif became enamored of a certain woman, whose name was Thorgunna. She was a woman of fine family, and Leif observed that she was possessed of rare intelligence. When Leif was preparing for his departure, Thorgunna asked to be permitted to accompany him. Leif inquired whether she had in this the approval of her kinsman. She replied that she did not care for it. Leif responded that he did not deem it the part of wisdom to abduct so high-born a woman in a strange country, and we so few in number. "It is by no means certain that thou shalt find this to be the better decision," said Thorgunna. "I shall put it to the proof notwithstanding," said Leif. "Then I tell thee," said Thorgunna, "that I am no longer a lone woman, for I am pregnant, and upon thee I charge it. I foresee that I shall give birth to a male child, and though thou give this no heed, yet will I rear the boy and send him to thee in Greenland, when he shall be fit to take his place with other men. And I foresee that thou wilt get as much profit of this son as is thy due from this our parting. Moreover, I mean to come to Greenland myself before the end comes." Leif gave her a gold finger ring, a Greenland wadmal mantle, and a belt of walrus tusk. This boy came to Greenland and was called Thorgils. Leif acknowledged his paternity, and some men will have it that this Thorgils came to Iceland in the summer before the Froda wonder. However, this Thorgils was afterwards in Greenland, and there seemed to be something not altogether natural about him before the end came. Leif and his companions sailed away from the Hebrides, and arrived in Norway in the autumn. Leif went to the court of King Olaf Tryggvason. He was well received by the king, who felt that he could see that Leif was a man of great accomplishments. Upon one occasion the king came to speech with Leif and asked him, "Is it thy purpose to sail to Greenland in the summer?" "It is my purpose," said Leif, "if it be your will." "I believe it will be well," answers the king, "and thither thou shalt go upon my errand, to proclaim Christianity there." Leif replied that the king should decide, but gave it as his belief that it would be difficult to carry this mission to a successful issue in Greenland. The king replied that he knew of no man who would be better fitted for this undertaking. and in thy hands the cause will surely prosper." "This can only be," said Leif, "if I enjoy the grace of your protection." Leif put to sea when his ship was ready for the voyage. For a long time he was tossed about upon the ocean, and came upon lands of which he had previously had no knowledge. There were self-sown wheat fields and vines growing there. There were also those trees there which are called mausur, and of all these they took specimens. Some of the timbers were so large that they were used in building. Leif found men upon a wreck, and took them home with him, and procured quarters for them all during the winter. In this wise he showed his nobleness and goodness, since he introduced Christianity into the country, and saved the men from the wreck; and he was called Leif the Lucky ever after. Leif landed in Ericsfirth, and then went home to Brattahlid. He was well received by every one. He soon proclaimed Christianity throughout the land, and the Catholic faith, and announced King Olaf Tryggvason's messages to the people, telling them how much excellence and how great glory accompanied this faith. Eric was slow in forming the determination to forsake his old belief, but Thiodhild embraced the faith promptly, and caused a church to be built at some distance from the house. This building was called Thiodhild's Church, and there she and those persons who had accepted Christianity, and they were many, were wont to offer their prayers. Thiodhild would not have intercourse with Eric after that she had received the faith, whereat he was sorely vexed. At this time there began to be much talk about a voyage of exploration to that country which Leif had discovered. The leader of this expedition was Torstein Ericsson, who was a good man, and an intelligent, and blessed with many friends. Eric was likewise invited to join them, for the men believed that his luck and foresight would be of great furtherance. He was slow in deciding, but did not say nay when his friends besought him to go. They thereupon equipped that ship in which Torbjorn had come out, and 20 men were selected for the expedition. They took little cargo with them, nought else save their weapons and provisions. On that morning, when Eric set out from his home, he took with him a little chest containing gold and silver. He hid this treasure, and then went his way. He had proceeded but a short distance, however, when he fell from his horse, and broke his ribs, and dislocated his shoulder, whereat he cried, "Ai, ai!" By reason of this accident he sent his wife word that she should procure the treasure which he had concealed, for to the hiding of the treasure he attributed his misfortune. Thereafter they sailed cheerily out of Ericsfirth in high spirits over their plan. They were long tossed about upon the ocean, and could not lay the course they wished. They came in sight of Iceland, and likewise saw birds from the Irish coast. Their ship was, in sooth, driven hither and thither over the sea. In the autumn they turned back, worn out by toil and exposure to the elements, and exhausted by their labours, and arrived at Ericsfirth at the very beginning of winter. Then said Eric, "More cheerful were we in the summer, when we put out of the firth, but we still live, and it might have been much worse." Thorstein answers, "It will be a princely deed to endeavour to look well after the wants of all these men, who are now in need, and to make provision for them during the winter." Eric answers, "It is ever true, as it is said, that it is never clear ere the answer comes, and so it must be here. We will act now upon thy counsel in this manner." All of the men, who were not otherwise provided for, accompanied the father and son. They landed thereupon, and went home to Brattahlid, where they remained throughout the winter. Thorstein Ericsson weds Gudrid. Apparitions. Now it is to be told that Thorstein Ericsson sought Gudrid, Torbjorn's daughter, in wedlock. His suit was favourably received both by herself and by her father, and it was decided that Thorstein should marry Gudrid, and the wedding was held at Brattahlid in the autumn. The entertainment sped well, and it was very numerously attended. Thorstein had a home in the western settlement at a certain farmstead which is called Lysufirth. A half interest in this property belonged to a man named Thorstein, whose wife's name was Sigrid. Thorstein went to Lysufirth in the autumn to his namesake, and Gudrid bore him company. They were well received, and remained there during the winter. It came to pass that sickness appeared in their home early in the winter. Gard was the name of the overseer there. He had few friends. He took sick first and died. It was not long before one after another took sick and died. Then Torstein, Eric's son, fell sick, and Sigrid, the wife of Torstein, his namesake. And one evening Sigrid wished to go to the house, which stood over against the outer door, and Gudrid accompanied her. They were facing the outer door when Sigrid uttered a loud cry. "We have acted thoughtlessly," exclaimed Gudrid, "yet thou needest not cry, though the cold strikes thee. Let us go in again as speedily as possible." Sigrid answered, "This may not be in this present plight. All of the dead folk are drawn up here before the door now. Among them I see thy husband, Torstein, and I can see myself there, and it is distressful to look upon." But directly this had passed, she exclaimed, "Let us go now, Gudrid. I no longer see the band." The overseer had vanished from her sight, whereas it had seemed to her before that he stood with a whip in his hand and made as if he would scourge the flock. So they went in, and ere the morning came she was dead, and a coffin was made ready for the corpse. And that same day the men planned to row out to fish, and Thorstein accompanied them to the landing place, and in the twilight he went down to see their catch. Thorstein, Eric's son, then sent word to his namesake that he should come to him, saying that all was not as it should be there, for the housewife was endeavoring to rise to her feet, and wished to get in under the clothes beside him, and when he entered the room she was come up on the edge of the bed. He thereupon seized her hands and held a pole-axe before her breast. Thorstein, Eric's son, died before nightfall. Thorstein, the master of the house, bade Gudrid lie down and sleep, saying that he would keep watch over the bodies during the night. Thus she did, and early in the night Thorstein, Eric's son, sat up and spoke, saying that he desired Gudrid to be called thither, for that it was his wish to speak with her. "It is God's will that this hour be given me for my own, and for the betterment of my condition." Thorstein, the master, went in search of Gudrid, and waked her, and bade her cross herself and pray God to help her. "Thorstein, Eric's son, has said to me that he wishes to see thee. Thou must take counsel with thyself now what thou wilt do, for I have no advice to give thee." She replied, "It may be that this is intended to be one of those incidents which shall afterward be held in remembrance, this strange event, and it is my trust that God will keep watch over me. Wherefore, under God's mercy, I shall venture to go to him, and learn what it is that he would say, for I may not escape this if it be designed to bring me harm. I will do this lest he go further, for it is my belief that the matter is a grave one." So Gudrid went and drew near to Thorstein, and he seemed to her to be weeping. He spoke a few words in her ear in a low tone, so that she alone could hear them, but this he said so that all could hear, that those persons would be blessed who kept well the faith, and that it carried with it all help and consolation. And yet many there were, said he, who kept it but ill. "This is no proper usage, which has obtained here in Greenland since Christianity was introduced here, to inter men in unconsecrated earth, with naught but a brief funeral service. It is my wish that I be conveyed to the church, together with the others who have died here. Gard, however, I would have you burn upon a pyre as speedily as possible, since he has been the cause of all of the apparitions which have been seen here during the winter." He spoke to her also of her own destiny, and said that she had a notable future in store for her, but he bade her beware of marrying any Greenlander. He directed her also to give their property to the church and to the poor, and then sank down again a second time. It had been the custom in Greenland, after Christianity was introduced there, to bury persons on the farmsteads where they died, in unconsecrated earth. A pole was erected in the ground, touching the breast of the dead, and subsequently, when the priests came thither, the pole was withdrawn and holy water poured in the orifice, and the funeral service held there, although it might be long thereafter. The bodies of the dead were conveyed to the church at Ericsfirth, and the funeral services held there by the clergy. Torbjorn died soon after this, and all of his property then passed into Gudrid's possession. Eric took her to his home and carefully looked after her affairs. Concerning Tord of Hofdi. There was a man named Tord who lived at Hofdi on Hofdi strands. He married Fridgerd, daughter of Tori the Loiterer, and Fridgerd, daughter of Kjarval, the king of the Irish. Tord was a son of Bjorn Chestbutter, son of Torvald Spine, Aslake's son, the son of Bjorn Ironside, the son of Ragnar Shaggybreeks. They had a son named Snory. He married Thorhild Ptarmigan, daughter of Tord the Yowler. Their son was Tord Horsehead. Thorfinn Karlsefni was the name of Tord's son. Thorfinn's mother's name was Torun. Thorfinn was engaged in trading voyages and was reputed to be a successful merchant. One summer, Karlsefni equipped his ship with the intention of sailing to Greenland. Snorri, Thorbrand's son, of Optafirth, accompanied him, and there were 40 men on board the ship with them. There was a man named Bjarni, Grimolf's son, a man from Bridafirth, and another named Thorhall, Gamli's son, an Eastfirth man. They equipped their ship, the same summer as Karlsefni, with the intention of making a voyage to Greenland. They had also 40 men in their ship. When they were ready to sail, the two ships put to sea together. It has not been recorded how long a voyage they had, but it is to be told that both of the ships arrived at Ericsfirth in the autumn. Eric and other of the inhabitants of the country rowed to the ships, and a goodly trade was soon established between them. Gudrid was requested by the skippers to take such of their wares as she wished, while Eric, on his part, showed great munificence in return, in that he extended an invitation to both crews to accompany him home for winter quarters at Brattahlid. The merchants accepted this invitation and went with Eric. Their wares were then conveyed to Brattahlid, nor was there lack there of good and commodious storehouses in which to keep them, nor was there wanting much of that which they needed, and the merchants were well pleased with their entertainment at Eric's home during that winter. Now as it drew toward Yule, Eric became very taciturn, and less cheerful than had been his wont. On one occasion Karlsefni entered into conversation with Eric and said, "Hast thou aught weighing upon thee, Eric? The folk have remarked that thou art somewhat more silent than thou hast been hitherto. Thou hast entertained us with great liberality, and it behooves us to make such return as may lie within our power. Do thou now but make known the cause of thy melancholy." Eric answers, "Ye accept hospitality gracefully and in manly wise, and I am not pleased that ye should be the sufferers by reason of our intercourse. Rather am I troubled at the thought that it should be given out elsewhere, that ye have never passed a worse Yule than this, now drawing nigh, when Eric the Red was your host at Brattahlid in Greenland." "There shall be no cause for that," replied Karlsefni. "We have malt and meal and corn in our ships, and you are welcome to take of these whatsoever you wish, and to provide as liberal an entertainment as seems fitting to you." Eric accepted this offer, and preparations were made for the Yule feast, and it was so sumptuous that it seemed to the people that they had scarcely ever seen so grand an entertainment before. And after Yule, Karlsefni broached the subject of a marriage with Gudrid to Eric, for he assumed that with him rested the right to bestow her hand in marriage. Eric answered favorably, and said that she would accomplish the fate in store for her, adding that he had heard only good reports of him. And not to prolong this, the result was that Thorfinn was betrothed to Thurid, and the banquet was augmented, and their wedding was celebrated. And this befell at Brattahlid during the winter. About this time there began to be much talk at Brattahlid, to the effect that Wineland the Good should be explored, for, it was said, that country must be possessed of many goodly qualities. And so it came to pass that Karlsefni and Snory fitted out their ship for the purpose of going in search of that country in the spring. Bjarni and Thorhall joined the expedition with their ship, and the men who had borne them company. There was a man named Thorvard. He was wedded to Freydis, a natural daughter of Eric the Red. He also accompanied them together with Thorvald, Eric's son, and Thorhall, who was called the Huntsman. He had been for a long time with Eric as his hunter and fisherman during the summer, and as his steward during the winter. Thorhall was stout and swarthy and of giant stature. He was a man of few words, though given to abusive language when he did speak, and he ever incited Eric to evil. He was a poor Christian. He had a wide knowledge of the unsettled regions. He was on the same ship with Thorvard and Thorvald. They had that ship which Torbjorn had brought out. They had in all 160 men when they sailed to the western settlement and thence to Bear Island. Thence they bore away to the southward to Dugar. Then they saw land and launched a boat and explored the land, and found there large flat stones, and many of these were 12 ells wide. There were many Arctic foxes there. They gave a name to the country and called it Helluland, the land of flat stones. Then they sailed with northerly winds to Dogr, and land then lay before them, and upon it was a great wood and many wild beasts. An island lay off the land to the southeast, and there they found a bear, and they called this Bjarni, or Bear Island, while the land where the wood was they called Markland, or Forest Land. Thence they sailed southward along the land for a long time, and came to a cape. The land lay upon the starboard. There were long strands and sandy banks there. They rowed to the land, and found upon the cape there the keel of a ship, and they called it there Kielarnus, or Keelness. They also called the strands Furdustrandir, or Wonder Strands, because they were so long to sail by. Then the country became indented with bays, and they steered their ships into a bay. It was when Leif was with King Olaf Tryggvason, and he bade him proclaim Christianity to Greenland, that the king gave him 2 Gaels. The man's name was Haki, and the woman's Hakia. The king advised Leif to have recourse to these people if he should stand in need of fleetness, for they were swifter than deer. Eric and Leif had tendered Karlsefni the services of this couple. Now when they had sailed past Wonder Strands, they put the Gaels ashore and directed them to run to the southward, and investigate the nature of the country, and return again before the end of the 3rd half-day. They were each clad in a garment which they called kiafal, which was so fashioned that it had a hood at the top, was open at the sides, was sleeveless, and was fastened between the legs with buttons and loops, while elsewhere they were naked. Karlsefni and his companions cast anchor, and lay there during their absence, and when they came again, one of them carried a bunch of grapes, and the other an ear of new-sown wheat. They went on board the ship, whereupon Karlsefni and his followers held on their way, until they came to where the coast was indented with bays. They stood into a bay with their ships. There was an island out at the mouth of the bay, about which there were strong currents, wherefore they called it Straumi, or Stream Isle. There were so many birds there that it was scarcely possible to step between the eggs. They sailed through the firth, and called it Straumfjord, or Streamfirth, and carried their cargoes ashore from the ships, and established themselves there. They had brought with them all kinds of livestock. It was a fine country there. There were mountains thereabouts. They occupied themselves exclusively with the exploration of the country. They remained there during the winter, and they had taken no thought for this during the summer. The fishing began to fail, and they began to fall short of food. Then Thorhall the huntsman disappeared. They had already prayed to God for food, but it did not come as promptly as their necessities seemed to demand. They searched for Thorhall for 3 half-days, and found him on a projecting crag. He was lying there and looking up at the sky, with mouth and nostrils agape, and mumbling something. They asked him why he had gone thither. He replied that this did not concern any one. They asked him then to go home with them, and he did so. Soon after this, a whale appeared there, and they captured it and flensed it, and no one could tell what manner of whale it was, and when the cooks had prepared it, they ate of it, and were all made ill by it. Then Thorhall, approaching them, said, "Did not the Red Beard prove more helpful than your Christ? This is my reward for the verses which I composed to Thor the Trustworthy. Seldom has he failed me." When the people heard this, they cast the whale down into the sea, and made their appeals to God. The weather then improved, and they could now row out to fish, and thenceforward they had no lack of provisions, for they could hunt game on the land, gather eggs on the island, and catch fish from the sea. Concerning Karlsefni and Torhall. It is said that Torhall wished to sail to the northward beyond Wonder Strands in search of Wineland, while Karlsefni desired to proceed to the southward off the coast. Torhall prepared for his voyage out below the island, having only 9 men in his party, for all the remainder of the company went with Karlsefni. And one day, when Torhall was carrying water aboard his ship and was drinking, he recited this ditty: "When I came, these brave men told me, here the best of drink I'd get. Now with water pail behold me, wine and I are strangers yet. Stooping at the spring I've tested all the wine this land affords. Of its vaunted charms divested, poor indeed are its rewards." And when they were ready, they hoisted sail, whereupon Torhall recited this ditty: "Comrades, let us now be faring homeward to our own again. Let us try the sea steed's daring, give the chafing courser rein. Those who will may bide in quiet, let them praise their chosen land, feasting on a whale steak diet in their home by Wonder Strand." Note: the prose sense of the verse is: "Let us return to our countrymen, leaving those, who like the country here, to cook their whale on Wonder Strands." End note. Then they sailed away to the northward past Wonder Strands and Keelness, intending to cruise to the westward around the cape. They encountered westerly gales, were driven ashore in Ireland, where they were grievously maltreated and thrown into slavery. There Torhall lost his life, according to that which traders have related. It is now to be told of Karlsefni that he cruised southward off the coast with Snorri and Biarni and their people. They sailed for a long time, and until they came at last to a river which flowed down from the land into a lake, and so into the sea. There were great bars at the mouth of the river, so that it could only be entered at the height of the flood tide. Karlsefni and his men sailed into the mouth of the river, and called it there Hop, a small landlocked bay. They found self-sown wheat fields on the land there. Wherever there were hollows, and wherever there was hilly ground, there were vines. Every brook there was full of fish. They dug pits on the shore where the tide rose highest, and when the tide fell there were halibut in the pits. There were great numbers of wild animals of all kinds in the woods. They remained there 1/2 a month, and enjoyed themselves, and kept no watch. They had their livestock with them. Now one morning early, when they looked about them, they saw a great number of skin canoes, and staves were brandished from the boats, with a noise like flails, and they were revolved in the same direction in which the sun moves. Then said Karlsefni: "What may this betoken?" Snorri, Thorbrand's son, answered him: "It may be that this is a signal of peace, wherefore let us take a white shield and display it." And thus they did. Thereupon the strangers rowed toward them, and went upon the land, marvelling at those whom they saw before them. They were swarthy men, and ill-looking, and the hair of their heads was ugly. They had great eyes, and were broad of cheek. They tarried there for a time, looking curiously at the people they saw before them, and then rowed away, and to the southward around the point. Karlsefni and his followers had built their huts above the lake, some of their dwellings being near the lake, and others farther away. Now they remained there that winter. No snow came there, and all of their livestock lived by grazing. And when spring opened, they discovered, early one morning, a great number of skin canoes rowing from the south past the cape, so numerous that it looked as if coals had been scattered broadcast out before the bay. And on every boat staves were waved. Thereupon Karlsefni and his people displayed their shields, and when they came together they began to barter with each other. Especially did the strangers wish to buy red cloth, for which they offered in exchange peltries and quite grey skins. They also desired to buy swords and spears, but Karlsefni and Snorri forbade this. In exchange for perfect unsullied skins, the Skrellings would take red stuff a span in length, which they would bind around their heads. So their trade went on for a time, until Karlsefni and his people began to grow short of cloth, when they divided it into such narrow pieces that it was not more than a finger's breadth wide. but the Skrellings still continued to give just as much for this as before, or more. It so happened that a bull belonging to Karlsefni and his people ran out from the woods, bellowing loudly. This so terrified the Skrellings that they sped out to their canoes, and then rowed away to the southward along the coast. For 3 entire weeks nothing more was seen of them. At the end of this time, however, a great multitude of Skrelling boats was discovered approaching from the south, as if a stream were pouring down, and all of their staves were waved in a direction contrary to the course of the sun, and the Skrellings were all uttering loud cries. Thereupon Karlsefni and his men took red shields and displayed them. The Skrellings sprang from their boats, and they met then, and fought together. There was a fierce shower of missiles, for the Skrellings had war slings. Karlsefni and Snorri observed that the Skrellings raised up on a pole a great ball-shaped body, almost the size of a ship's belly, and nearly black in color, and this they hurled from the pole upon the land above Karlsefni's followers, and it made a frightful noise where it fell. Whereat a great fear seized upon Karlsefni and all his men, so that they could think of naught but flight, and of making their escape up along the river bank, for it seemed to them that the troop of the Skrellings was rushing towards them from every side, and they did not pause until they came to certain jutting crags, where they offered a stout resistance. Freydis came out, and seeing that Karlsefni and his men were fleeing, she cried, "Why do you flee from these wretches, such worthy men as ye, when, meseems, ye might slaughter them like cattle? Had I but a weapon, methinks I would fight better than any one of you." They gave no heed to her words. Freydis sought to join them, but lagged behind, for she was not hale. She followed them, however, into the forest, while the Skrellings pursued her. She found a dead man in front of her. This was Torbjorn, Snorri's son, his skull cleft by a flat stone. His naked sword lay beside him. She took it up and prepared to defend herself with it. The Skrellings then approached her, whereupon she stripped down to her shift and slapped her breast with the naked sword. At this the Skrellings were terrified and ran down to their boats and rowed away. Karlsefni and his companions, however, joined her and praised her valor. 2 of Karlsefni's men had fallen, and a great number of the Skrellings. Karlsefni's party had been overpowered by dint of superior numbers. They now returned to their dwellings and bound up their wounds, and weighed carefully what throng of men that could have been, which had seemed to descend upon them from the land. It now seemed to them that there could have been but the one party, that which came from the boats, and that the other troop must have been an ocular delusion. The Skrellings, however, found the dead man, and an axe lay beside him. One of their number picked up the axe and struck at a tree with it, and one after another they tested it, and it seemed to them to be a treasure and to cut well. Then one of their number seized it and hewed at a stone with it, so that the axe broke, whereat they concluded that it could be of no use, since it would not withstand stone, and they cast it away. It now seemed clear to Karlsefni and his people that although the country thereabouts was attractive, their life would be one of constant dread and turmoil by reason of the hostility of the inhabitants of the country, so they forthwith prepared to leave, and determined to return to their own country. They sailed to the northward off the coast, and found 5 Skrellings clad in skin doublets lying asleep near the sun. There were vessels beside them containing animal marrow mixed with blood. Karlsefni and his company concluded that they must have been banished from their own land. They put them to death. They afterwards found a cape, upon which there was a great number of animals, and this cape looked as if it were one cake of dung, by reason of the animals which lay there at night. They now arrived again at Streamfirth, where they found great abundance of all those things of which they stood in need. Some men say that Bjarni and Freydis remained behind here with 100 men, and went no further, while Karlsefni and Snorri proceeded to the southward with 40 men, tarrying at Hop barely 2 months, and returning again the same summer. Karlsefni then set out with one ship in search of Thorhall the huntsman, but the greater part of the company remained behind. They sailed to the northward around Keelness, and then bore to the westward, having land to the larboard. The country there was a wooded wilderness as far as they could see, with scarcely an open space, and when they had journeyed a considerable distance, a river flowed down from the east toward the west. They sailed into the mouth of the river, and lay to by the southern bank. THE SLAYING OF Thorvald, Eric's son. It happened one morning that Karlsefni and his companions discovered in an open space in the woods above them a speck, which seemed to shine toward them, and they shouted at it. It stirred, and it was a Uniped, who skipped down to the bank of the river by which they were lying. Thorvald, a son of Eric the Red, was sitting at the helm, and the Uniped shot an arrow into his inwards. Thorvald drew out the arrow and exclaimed, "There is fat around my paunch. We have hit upon a fruitful country, and yet we are not like to get much profit of it." Thorvald died soon after from this wound. Then the Uniped ran away back toward the north. Karlsefni and his men pursued him, and saw him from time to time. The last they saw of him, he ran down into a creek. Then they turned back, whereupon one of the men recited this ditty: "Eager our men up hill down dell hunted a Uniped. Hearken, Karlsefni, while they tell how swift the quarry fled." Then they sailed away back toward the north, and believed they had got sight of the land of the Unipeds; nor were they disposed to risk the lives of their men any longer. They concluded that the mountains of Hop and those which they had now found formed one chain, and this appeared to be so because they were about an equal distance removed from Streamfirth in either direction. They sailed back, and passed the third winter at Streamfirth. Then the men began to divide into factions, of which the women were the cause, and those who were without wives endeavored to seize upon the wives of those who were married, whence the greatest trouble arose. Snorri, Karlsefni's son, was born the first autumn, and he was 3 winters old when they took their departure. When they sailed away from Wineland they had a southerly wind, and so came upon Markland, where they found 5 Skrellings, of whom 1 was bearded, 2 were women, and 2 were children. Karlsefni and his people took the boys, but the others escaped, and these Skrellings sank down into the earth. They bore the lads away with them, and taught them to speak, and they were baptized. They said that their mother's name was Veitildi, and their father's Uvaigi. They said that kings governed the Skrellings, one of whom was called Avaldamon, and the other Valdidida. They stated that there were no houses there, and that the people lived in caves or holes. They said that there was a land on the other side over against their country, which was inhabited by people who wore white garments, and yelled loudly, and carried poles before them to which rags were attached. And people believed that this must have been Vitramanaland, white men's land, or Ireland the Great. Now they arrived in Greenland, and remained during the winter with Eric the Red. Biarni, Grimolf's son, and his companions were driven out into the Atlantic, and came into a sea which was filled with worms, and their ship began to sink beneath them. Note: this reference is to the Toredo, or shipworm, that bores into wood, and is often a source of danger to unsheathed vessels. End note. They had a boat which had been coated with seal tar; this the sea worm does not penetrate. They took their places in this boat, and then discovered that it would not hold them all. Then said Biarni, "Since the boat will not hold more than half of our men, it is my advice that the men who are to go in the boat be chosen by lot, for this selection must not be made according to rank." This seemed to them all such a manly offer that no one opposed it. So they adopted this plan, the men casting lots, and it fell to Biarni to go in the boat, and half of the men with him, for it would not hold more. But when the men were come into the boat, an Icelander who was in the ship, and who had accompanied Biarni from Iceland, said, "Dost thou intend, Biarni, to forsake me here?" "It must be even so," answers Biarni. "Not such was the promise thou gavest my father," he answers, "when I left Iceland with thee, that thou wouldst thus part with me, when thou saidst that we should both share the same fate." "So be it. It shall not rest thus," answered Biarni. "Do thou come hither, and I will go to the ship, for I see that thou art eager for life." Biarni thereupon boarded the ship, and this man entered the boat, and they went their way, until they came to Dublin in Ireland, and there they told this tale. Now it is the belief of most people that Biarni and his companions perished in the Maggot Sea, for they were never heard of afterward. Karlsefni and his wife Thurid's issue. The following summer Karlsefni sailed to Iceland and Gudrid with him, and he went home to Reyniness. His mother believed that he had made a poor match, and she was not at home the first winter. However, when she became convinced that Gudrid was a very superior woman, she returned to her home, and they lived happily together. Hallfrid was a daughter of Snorri, Karlsefni's son. She was the mother of Bishop Torlach, Runolf's son. They had a son named Torbjorn, whose daughter's name was Torun. She was Bishop Bjorn's mother. Torgeir was the name of a son of Snorri, Karlsefni's son. He was the father of Ingveld, mother of Bishop Brand the Elder. Steinunn was a daughter of Snorri, Karlsefni's son, who married Einar, a son of Grundar Ketil, a son of Torvald Crook, a son of Tori of Espihol. Their son was Torstein the Unjust. He was the father of Gudrun, who married Jorund of Keldur. Their daughter was Halla, the mother of Flosi, the father of Valgerd, the mother of Herra Erlend the Stout, the father of Herra Hauk the Lawman. Another daughter of Flosi was Tordis, the mother of Fru Ingigerd the Mighty. Her daughter was Fru Hallbera, abbess of Reyniness at Stad. Many other great people in Iceland are descended from Karlsefni and Thurid, who are not mentioned here. God be with us. Amen.